What's up? This is Dominique Beaumonte, and you are listening to Season with Salt, the podcast. This is the season of sharing and gifting and loving and doing all kinds of things that we normally do with each other. We do it with our families. And I was reflecting about going to Portland a few years ago when I first started realizing that I needed to leave Sacramento during the Thanksgiving season, because I would be like, nah, I'm not going anywhere. And then I wouldn't go, and I would be lightweight depressed because I'd be like, wait a minute, everybody's with their family, everybody's eating good food, and people have the capacity to make you feel welcomed, like when you're in their presence. If you're kind of third wheeling it at somebody else's Thanksgiving, but there's nothing like the comfort of being around your people, being able to take your shoes off, being able to relax. And so I realized that that was something that I needed around the holidays. And Thanksgiving is sort of like the door to the holidays. So I decided a couple of years ago, I'm never going to, until I get a family of my own. And it's not that I don't love folks and folks don't treat me right. It's actually for a couple of years, my church has a Thanksgiving service, and I would either plan it or speak at it. And um, I just, that I thought that that would be enough, but it never was. And so my intentionality around the holiday season is to make it what I want to be and to rely on what has worked in the past. And what has worked in the past is being in close proximity with people that I love and that I know love me and that I can be myself around. And looking forward to the holidays this year. But anyway, so first, let me preface what I'm going to talk about in this episode by saying that I was reading in the Bible. I'm taking a First and Second Samuel survey class in seminary, and one of the focuses has been on the relationship between David and Jonathan. And I'm not going to give a long speech about, the religious relationship between David and Jonathan. I do not have time for that, nor might you find it interesting. But they had a very, very interesting relationship. And the Bible says that essentially that their hearts were knit together. And I was listening to that. I was listening to one of the women at my church talking about how God had blessed her with a friend. And I was thinking about how at the end of the year, it's really important to do a check in and to think about the friendships that you have sustained throughout the year, the friendships that you have lost, the friendships that perhaps is an opportunity to reconcile. Um, and then I'm gonna be honest with you. I thought that I met someone that I was like, "Oh, this could be a good friend." And what I noticed about the person was that there were things about me that they were trivializing. I had opened up to the person about being socially awkward and sometimes over asking questions as a means to kind of fill the air and not being comfortable with silence when you're developing friendships with people, and also navigating what it means to be a quirky introvert with extrovert tendencies, but also realizing that the type of person that I am, people who know me either really love me or really don't like me. There's not a lot of in between, because the other thing that I tend to do, which is so funny, it reminds me of Issa on Insecure. I'm the person that just gets really awkward and starts saying inappropriate things and over talking when I don't know what to do, especially if I haven't been around people socially. I'll just I was reflecting on my behavior in the social environment that I was in over the weekend and I was giving myself feedback, because sometimes you leave somewhere and you're like, did I overdo it? And I think that's especially important for the holidays because Now, I don't drink, but I know that I have friends that drink. There are places that you're gonna go, there'll be parties and holiday gatherings where people are drinking, but also I think people feel the freedom to kind of release. They're on vacation, and so anyway, I was reflecting on my own behavior and, like, how I showed up, and, like, I was thinking to myself, like, there's some things that I wish I could, like, say to myself, "Okay, you're doing this because you navigate awkward moments by doing things that later on you're gonna question." So, like, this is the point where you can, like, check yourself and, like, stop doing the thing that is gonna make you feel embarrassed later. Anyway, so I was doing a lot of that. But this potential friend that I was sort of navigating a friendship with, uh, wasn't as kind to me in that regard. In fact, like, kinda made me feel bad for asking questions, you know, kind of pointed out that I was sort of like being intrusive. I don't know. It was just like a weird thing. And I was thinking about, like, oh, like, I really want to be friends with people who can embrace, like, that sort of quirky, like, unsure side of myself, like, until we get comfortable enough where, like, we know we like each other, we can hang out. But I just didn't feel that, and I actually felt bad, and I'm like, "This is not the way that a friendship is supposed to start." So I was like, X on that, like, I think in my 20s and 30s, I really benefited from being in a fraternity, right? Because, like, I have these automatic friends, and sometimes it's literally automatic. Like, I run into somebody, I'll find out we're both an alpha, and then boom, great. I've not ever had a lot of challenges with female friends, like non-intimate female friends, because like that sometimes just with church and college and leadership and some of the activities that I have participated in, that's been a little bit easier. And to be honest with you, I've had the same friends for long periods of time. Like, it's my female friends tend to be like long-term friends. Like, if we were friends 10 years ago, it's likely that we're friends now. Like, easier to navigate because they get boyfriends or husbands or kids, and they kind of just live their life. My male friends, that's a little bit difficult because, like, as you mature, like, things change for you. So I've had seasons where all my friends were married, and so there's certain things that you can do with your married friends that you can't do with your non-married friends. Well, in this stage of my life, like being a 40-year-old man without kids or a wife, like your the things that you're interested in doing, the way that you want to spend your money, the way that you want to spend your weekend are, like, very interesting. And then when you overlap that with being a Christian and being a person who believes in a form of sanctification and being a preacher and all these things, like, you catapult that, it really limits the kinds of friendships that you can develop and sustain, because either people are on a different wavelength or doing different things or don't have the resources. And so you're just like, forget it. It's easier for me to hang out by myself because I don't want to go to Ruth's Chris and then have to pay for you, right? Or feel bad because the price point at a place that I want to go to is higher than what you're in what you can pay. So anyway, all of these things, whether it's watching Insecure or listening to Issa on The Breakfast Club or navigating this new friendship or listening to one of the sisters at my church, like, I was thinking, like, this is the time of the year to kind of take a step back and assess all of the friendships that I have. And I was kind of like doing it from two perspectives. I was looking at these friendships um, and I'll share it with you. I didn't really kind of make a list of this stuff. I just started thinking about, this is what I want to talk about on my podcast, and it's my podcast, so I do what I want. So the first thing is that in 2021, we've kind of settled into what it means to be in a pandemic, what it means to ease back into regular life, but also, like, I feel like the early stages of the pandemic kind of, like, really cleaned out for me, like, friendships, because there's some people that are friends with you because it's convenient, right? Like they need a travel buddy and they know you have the resources or the money. So it's easy for them to like navigate to you for things that they wouldn't necessarily do with other friends. Also, like I'm a person that doesn't really like to talk on the phone. So since I don't really like to talk on the phone, like I mean that X is like if I call you on the phone, it's either I got something really important and juicy to say, or we operate in like very similar contexts and we need to like review or update each other on something that happened. Sometimes it's just, and I'm a storyteller by nature, so like if I got a story, I'm calling you. But I'm also very awkward on the phone because I don't like to just hang on the phone without. I need an agenda, right? And so like friends that need the face to face, but couldn't get it, so they wanted to talk on the phone. That didn't work out for me, right? The other thing is I'm a multitasker, and I don't like. It's hard for me to be focused on one thing at the same time. So I think the pandemic kind of like narrowed my friendships with people because I mean, I just, like I feel like I am like really good friends with people that I only connect with on Facebook. Now, do they feel that way? I don't know. I don't know. So the pandemic caused me to say, okay, who are the people that I really want to connect with? Like, who are the people who are worth like meeting up at the park outside or going to a birthday party or connecting on Zoom, even though I've already been on Zoom all night. Like, who are the people that are worth like sitting on a restaurant patio and enjoying that? Like, so the pandemic helped me to see that, oh, I've got some friends, there are some people that I consider to be friends that are worth a certain amount of risk to connect with, right? And then I have other people that are like, they not checking for me and I'm not checking for them. We are to each other what each other needs when each other needs it. It's not that serious. Like we're gonna be cool. We actually don't have to talk at all. Like following each other on Twitter is probably enough. And so the pandemic is helping me to kind of iron that out. When we're easing out of the pandemic, then there are all these kind of social sort of constraints, right? Because there are some people that like the pandemic is over and let's like jump into risky situations. Like let's go on a trip. Let's populate very close in spaces. Let's take our mask off and go into this hole in the wall, Indian restaurant. No, I'm not. That's not. Let's not. I also don't like going to people's houses. So, like, if I'm naturally, the pandemic has nothing to do with this. I'm not rolling up to your house unless I know that. And I actually wasn't always like that, but then I had a bad situation with somebody that I thought that was my friend, and I showed up at their house, like, which is something that I would never do. And they were like, oh, don't come without calling. And since I never would do that, I was like really embarrassed and had decided I would never, ever, ever, ever go to somebody's house. And that was like right before the pandemic. Anyway, I'm all over the place. So here's what I've been thinking about as far as how to contextualize and understand and assess my friendships with people. Um, do I have realistic and unselfish expectations? Do we share that between each other? Because I think sometimes, like, and I noticed this, like, when I had a crew of friends, like when I first moved to Sacramento, that, when they were either maybe we're in the frat together and when they were released to go to the chapter meeting by their spouse, then we were just going to be kicking it after the chapter meeting because they had that window of opportunity to be out of the house, right? Um, but then later, it sort of became a thing where that became not possible. Other constraints on their lives like made it impossible. And that doesn't mean that the friendship is over. It just means that the friendship has to manifest in a different way. The other thing for me is that, especially during the pandemic, like I gained this passion or I sort of cultivated even more this passion for traveling. So I can get in the car and just go somewhere and I don't need other people. I don't need affirmation. I don't need to know what people think. Or I don't need to know if people want to come. None of that. I'm just gone. And so I think that I had to really take into consideration like who is my friend and what are my expectations for friends and how am I meeting the expectations that other people have for me? As an introvert and a person that really likes to be by myself and enjoys that and is empowered by that, I realize that I have some friends that need to see me sometimes, right? And it might just be once every 2 or 3 months, but I need to avail myself to do things that might initially feel uncomfortable. And if you're like me, like some things like feel uncomfortable. The thought of like gathering as a big group just doesn't excite me at all. But I can honestly say though that with the right people, like when we're reconnecting, like it's not as bad as my mind says it is. But I've been so used to being like by myself that I'm like, forget that. Like I'm not gonna meet up in a group to do nothing. Right. Like I don't like the idea of like a crowd gathering like really makes me uncomfortable. And I think particularly like during this holiday season, gathering is going to take on a new meaning, right? And so I'm going to have to think about what are the rules of engagement for me? Where am I willing to meet? What am I willing to do? And how can I develop some real expectations with and for my friends so that I don't miss out on opportunities to gather and feel love from the people around me. So I think that this is the season that you have to actually decide what is what I want to how do I what kind of friend do I want to be during this holiday season. Also, like I think a lot of if you have friends with kids, then like that's going to look different because maybe they're going to need that escape or that getaway or that opportunity to just connect with lunch, or maybe their kids are asking about hanging out with your kids, like. So I think that really being creative, but also being safe, but also not living in fear, like, is really important in creating expectations around how friends will connect, this holiday season. I think also too, I've been thinking a lot about, for those of us that, have older people in our lives that we love and connect with, like, we have to be judicious in our interactions with other people because we have to be also thinking about their safety, and I'm really, 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 really inspired by people who are like, you know what? My limitations as far as how I connect with people have everything to do with who I need to protect. I get that. And I think particularly friends without kids or who are not caretakers for older people, like we need to have grace and patience for that, right? If if you're a person that like is already a counselor and then you've been using COVID as an excuse to not be accountable to things and places and people that you need to be available for, then you need to think about how that is going to look, because folks be making decisions during the holidays around like who's their friend, like what kind of friend they are going to be, and they're really establishing their expectations because this is a season of giving and connecting and laughing and loving. And when you're unavailable or you're making excuses about being unavailable, listen, you are going to be exiting yourself from a lot of different friendships. So that's kind of things that I'm kind of thinking about as it considering all the intricacies of my personality and how I like to interact and communicate and gather with people. Like, what kind of friend am I being? I think this is the season of it, and it depends on who you are. Like, it might not be the season for gathering, right? Like, you might not feel comfortable with that. It might not be the season for gift giving. You might not be a gift giver. But let me tell you this: this is the season of thoughtfulness, and you can be so thoughtful in your endeavors to connect with people that it outweighs your barriers, right? Like maybe doing something that you haven't done before. Like I decided that last year was the last year that I would get Christmas cards and that I wouldn't send them. I'm starting beforehand. I'm going to connect with people. And it was so funny because like last year I was thinking about how when I would be going over like frat brothers or family members' houses, like in Seattle and in Portland, I would see all these Christmas cards on the refrigerator, and I'd be thinking to myself, well, why did I get this person's Christmas card, or why am I not on their address list? And then it occurred to me that they would even know my address. I would even be on their radar as a person to receive a gift because I haven't sent a card, right? So you sometimes the reason why you haven't gotten a card because you haven't sent one. Thoughtfulness goes a long way because it's like, what can I do to be present and to show up, even given my barriers or the barriers that other people have, right? And so just because we can't meet for brunch doesn't mean that that is the end of our friendship. I got to find a different way, right? And what is a gift to give to somebody based on their barriers? And how do I meet people halfway? I think is important. So, thoughtfulness, realistic, unselfish expectations, thoughtfulness. And then the last thing I think is important is when you're checking in on friendships and seeing where they are and taking assessment of what kind of friend that you have been. Um, Reciprocity is important. I wanted to end with reciprocity because I think that sometimes when we think of reciprocity, we think of like every relationship in our life has to be 50-50. Like I give some and you give some, then I give some and you give some. Well, the reality is that there are going to be some years of our lives, there are going to be some seasons of our friendships with other people that they don't have the capacity to give as much as we have the capacity to give, or we don't have the capacity to give as much as they have the capacity to give. So I might give 60 this year and you give 40, and then you give 70 next year and I give 30. We meet halfway, right? Like we all have those friends that we know we're going to have to make emotional concession for or monetary concession for. When I say emotional concession, I'm talking about like, there are some friends that I have that I know I just have to suck it up and listen to what they are going through before they even think about what I'm going through. I know that because they carry more and they carry in a different way, and I'm the person that they're willing to listen to, right? And so I think that in this season, I think it's really important to kind of think through your expectations for reciprocity, right? Sometimes like we can be really tit for tat, like you didn't do this for me, so I'm not going to do this for you, right? And so we have these expectations for folks that are unrealistic and they lead us to more pain and struggle and so I think that that's where thoughtfulness comes in, right? Like I can create a culture of thoughtfulness in my friends group, in my family group, in my cousin group, in my sibling group by starting it, right? And being a good example of it. I talked to you in one of the episodes about something that my middle brother, told me when he came to Sacramento to spend my birthday with me. And a part of it was that I had come for all of my other siblings and nephews and nieces' birthdays, and he wanted to repay that to me. Even though, like, I have come for 20 birthdays, like the one birthday that he came to Sacramento and showed up for me, like, made up for anything that I was feeling around animosity or, the lack of reciprocity because it touched my heart in that way. Now, I can never really explain that to him, but it was enough to make me be like, gosh, like I can do more, or I can try harder, or I can continue to do what I was already doing because sometimes we look for this instant gratification. We want for the things that we invest in friendships to pay off immediately, and that's just not realistic, right? And so um really evaluating like what if you have a false expectation for reciprocity and how you navigate that, I think is really important. So I think I'm gonna stop talking now, right? I really would like to know how you all feel about friendships and what you're experiencing in these days. And so if we talk and if you listen, call me, hit me up, text me and say, hey, I want to talk about something that I heard on your podcast. Or if you want to check in on where our friendship is, because we're friends, because I know a lot of my friends listen to this podcast. Hey, let's do that. Let's talk about where we are. I'm gonna close with this. I had noticed this year. I have one friend who, and preaching is really important to me, and I know that God has called me to preach, and so the reality is that I shouldn't be um, like I'm not preaching for the sake of other people. But I had a friend in my life that I noticed when I would preach, this person would like never show up. and for whatever reason, and not because it was outside of their capacity or ability, but they would be intentionally doing other things. Like, and when I say other things, like blatant other things, like it would be the day that I was preaching, and then they would be talking about like another church service that they attended and what that preacher talked about, and it was all it just didn't feel good to me, and so um a part of me was like, I'm cool on this person. Like, I'm a little bit lukewarm. I'm not going to like really address it with them, but I'm gonna reestablish my expectations. And that got a little bit weird for me because every time that they would talk about their needs for loyalty and attention and to meet up or whatever, I would keep thinking about like, oh, this is the same person that don't be coming to hear me preach, but not just that, be intentionally doing other things. And so one day, like I realized like I really want to be friends with this person. I really value what this person means in my life, and it's important for me to say something. So I said it jokingly. I was like, "Hey, it hurts my feelings when you go to other places where you know I'm preaching." And the person first was like most people, like, "Name a time," like, like like, "When, prove it." And so then I started like, I didn't wanna go there, but I needed to get it off my chest, so I started naming times, like, "This time and this time, and then you did this, and then you said this," and the person I think was shocked that I had so many, like, detailed notes that they were like, "Forget this, I cannot act like this person's feelings are not realistic." So they were like, "You know what? I'm sorry. I did do that. Like, I do that on a regular basis, and it's not about you at all. It's all about me and what I need, but now that I'm hearing this from you as a friend, I'm not gonna do that anymore." And it was just really powerful for me because it was like, okay, we're friends, right? Because making a commitment to me to say that you're going to make a sacrifice in your own life for my sake because it's something that I need. And I think that gone are the days where you need 200 friends. You are better off with two friends that care about you and love you and that can prove that to you on a regular basis than to have 200 people calling themselves your friends. And so this is a season to reassess, to reevaluate, to share with people what your expectations are, to give people grace if they can't meet your expectations, but also to know when to say, it's been real. Thank y'all for listening to Season with Salt, the podcast. My name is Dominique. You can check me out on SWS Podcast on Instagram, SWS The Podcast on Twitter, and SWS Podcast on Facebook. Love to connect with you. You can go to my website, seasonwithsaltpodcast.com. Thank y'all.
Season with salt.